Hey guys, Danielle McCarthy here. Welcome back to another week of my vlog. Today I'm going to be talking to you about how exposure can help you overcome a phobia. So in short, a phobia is when we have this intense anxiety towards something specific, okay? That might be spiders or public speaking, okay, or heights. And what tends to happen when we've got a phobia is we want to avoid experiencing that anxiety because it's intense, it's uncomfortable, it's unpleasant. So we try to avoid it. And this might mean that we start to avoid certain places or activities or things where we think we might be confronted with our phobia. So for example, if somebody had a phobia of spiders, that's a really common one, and it was an intense phobia where it started to take over their daily life and interfere with their daily life, they might start to avoid certain places where they thought they might come across a spider, okay? They might not go for a bushwalk, or they might even get to the stage of avoiding opening certain cupboards in their house or whatnot for fear that there's a spider there, okay? So that's a phobia. Now, one of the most evidence-based treatments for addressing phobias is exposure work, all right? Because like I said, when we have a phobia, we typically start to try to avoid certain situations where we might be confronted with that phobia, avoidance. And whilst that reduces or stops us from experiencing anxiety in the short term, what we know about avoidance is that over time, it actually leads to our anxiety worsening, okay? Our anxiety is unlikely to go away whilst we're avoiding the thing that we are scared of. So exposure kind of turns this around, all right? It starts to look at exposing us to what we're fearful of, gradually, step by step, until we're not fearful of that anymore. So what would happen is that we would take your phobia, say spiders, and we would start to look at different steps that we can start to expose you to spiders gradually until you're not anxious of that anymore. Because what we know about how anxiety works is that when we're confronted with anxiety, say we were put in the room with a spider, initially our anxiety would peak, it would go up really high. And at this point, we would usually run out of the room and get away from the spider. However, in exposure work, we're not allowed to avoid the anxiety anymore, so we would have to stay in the room with the spider. And what happens is that our anxiety reaches a certain point, and then if we stay in that situation, we're not allowed to leave, we're not allowed to avoid, over time what we know, and it's been shown time and time again, is that our anxiety comes down, all right? You might not believe it, but it will only reach a certain point and then will eventually come down over time. All right, and then when we're confronted with that same situation again, our anxiety will go up again, but maybe not as high this time, and then it'll come down again. And then the next time it'll go up, but maybe not as high, and then come down. And we keep doing it until it's just like this hiccup of anxiety. And that's exposure, all right? That's how it works. We know through so much research that eventually that anxiety will come down. So what happens is, with exposure work, we do it gradually. So we take your feared thing like spiders and we start breaking it down into smaller steps, less anxiety provoking steps. So what's your 100 out of 100 anxiety? And then we break it down. Okay, what would be about a 90 out of 100? What would be about an 80 out of 100, 70, 60, 50, 40, etc., etc. And it might get down to the point where the first step, which is around a 40 out of 100, it might be looking at the picture of a spider. Okay, and then it might be holding a picture of a spider, and then it might be seeing a dead spider in a jar, and then it might be holding the jar with the dead spider, and then it might be having a live spider in a jar, etc., etc., until we get to that point of 100 out of 100. So we break it down into smaller steps, and then we start down at a manageable step. It might be sitting around that 40 out of 100 step. Maybe it's holding the picture of a spider, where it's like we know that you're going to get anxiety, but it's not going to be terrible, awful and horrible. It's going to be manageable. So we would ask you to start there. And then we would do that work with you. So we would sit with you with the photo of the spider until the anxiety passed. And then we would get you to repeat it over and over again until it's not anxiety provoking anymore to hold a picture of a spider. And once that happens, when it doesn't cause you anxiety anymore, then we'd go to the next step. and then we'd go to the next step, and then the next step. And by the time you get up to the top of the triangle, the top of the exposure hierarchy, that 100 out of 100 won't be 100 out of 100 anymore, because you've overcome all these other steps. By the time you get to there, it's just a small step again to overcome that. And then once you reach the top, then you no longer have that phobia anymore. And that's basically how exposure works. It's really evidence-based, lots of research behind it, and it's the primary treatment for phobias. So I hope you found that useful, and it's helped you understand exposure and what it's all about and how we address phobias. But that's all for this week. I'll see you next week. Bye for now.